Alright, hi everyone, welcome to the quarterfinal of WWDC 2025. Congratulations on making it this far. On proposition today, we have Team DPS-MIS connoisseurs, and on opposition, we have DPS-3L. Judging today am I, Krish, your chair. Judging with me are Malin.
Okay,
Perfect. Observers are allowed in the room as long as you guys don't make any noise, any sounds, any cases. Just don't disturb the speaker who's speaking. If you want to leave, don't leave with me speech. Leave like after speech, that'll be much better. I don't need your speaking order because I don't need to fill the ballot in. Apart from that, 6-minute speeches, 4-minute reply speeches. POI could be the first and the last minute. I'll be using the after time. I'm using it after time. You hail a bell at the first minute, the bell at the 5th minute, do buzz at the 6th minute. At 6:15, I'll put my hands out, and I'll keep tapping until you finish your speech. I'll interrupt you if you speak longer than more than 5 seconds after that. So please finish your speech by 6:15. I don't want to interrupt you. Apart from that, the reply speeches have no POIs. Apart from that, I can get all ready. So in my encouragement, the proposition to begin this case.
Yes,
Begin this case. Sure.
Can you explain what is the stopwatch?
Sure. I think you should start on this. You can't get more than.
I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. Panel, the phrase that the end always justifies the means may seem cliche and catchy at first, but we need to really sit and think about it. Does the end always justify the mean? Right. So I, as the first speaker of field proposition, will be doing 3 major things in my speech. Firstly, some framing and characterization, defining the key terms, and presenting a major argument on how consequentialism can lead potentially to tyranny and the denial of rights. My second speaker will be providing more arguments and expanding and providing comparatives. And my third speaker will be stating the major flashpoints, rebutting team opposition's case arguments, and providing a quick summary of the debate, and our team should win. Right. So firstly, moving on to the key. Firstly, defining some key terms. What does consequentialism exactly mean? It's already given on the info page, but it is the philosophy that the morality of an action is to be judged solely by its consequences. Now, along with consequentialism, usually it is followed by a doctrine or principle known as utilitarianism, right? And that is a doctrine or the set of beliefs that as long as the end provides utility, happiness, and pleasure to the people, right? All means are justified, right? So now what essentially happens, and the reason why we are against this is because in a lot of situations when because actions are being taken to kind of provide happiness, to kind of maintain overall happiness and utility of the general public, a lot of the times what happens is that people in certain senses can start losing connection, could start losing emotional connection with their loved ones, for example. Because why? Because they want that overall happiness. They want that kind of that net utility, right? And now moving on to the key stakeholders. The two key stakeholders that are being affected over here are the people who are making the decisions. These could be the governments, rulers, or anyone for that matter, and the people who are being affected by the decision, right? And now what happens in most cases is that these decision-making individuals or entities, right? They could because they don't know. They are looking for the best consequence. Now this could lead to errors, which will be explained by my second speaker, and secondly, how this could possibly lead to the violation of freedom of choices and other moral rights that individuals have the right to propose. Right. So now with this, I move on to my first major argument that consequentialism and utilitarianism could lead potentially to tyranny and denial of rights. 3 layers of analysis. Firstly, the social analysis, right? How and why could consequentialism potentially lead to tyranny, right? So what happens is that these decision-making entities could, for example, they could defend certain actions, certain policies that are drafting on in the name of the greater good. They could They could construct oppressive policies, and they could blind the public by saying that all this is all for the greater good, right? And they could possibly try justifying these immoral actions, right? A very good evidence of this is that after the 9/11 attacks in the USA, the government started placing cameras in the houses of the people and started justifying this as as a way to kind of as a means of kind of protection against future terrorist attacks. But really, they invaded the privacy, and in many cases there were reports that the FBI was secretly collecting data of suspected individuals that were never convicted. Right. So this clearly leads to a violation of not only the moral rights, but if you also look at it from another aspect, we see that when they start kind of blinding their policies in the name of the greater good, this makes them less accountable, and in many cases this leads to kind of authoritarianism in a sense, right? And now the impact is on obviously the main key stakeholders, the individuals, is that people are stepped away from their moral rights and justice that they obviously deserve, right? And now if we look at it from a moral view, right, in many cases when we sit and think about it, for example, if let us take another example of the Roman games, right? Back in the 14 and 1500s, right? So if let us say the people who are organizing the games ordered the lions to hunt and chase the Christians, right? And if that is something that the audience overall got pleasure from watching, right? If that is something that provided them the total net utility, it would be seen as good, it would be seen as fine. But what about those Christians? What about those people who are being hunted by the lions? What about their individual rights, right? And thirdly comes the principle here is that a proposition could opposition would come and argue that consequentialism is necessary to achieve the greater good, but our argument, our side is that if you're doing something that is morally correct, it will eventually lead to a correct outcome, right? So you will need to essentially rely and kind of justify a means. For example, the trolley problem. There's a pretty famous example of the trolley problem, wherein either you kill one person to save two other people, or you save the person, you don't kill and you let the other two people die. But in this case, you could choose to do nothing. That is what your moral obligation tells you, right? So you would still abide by a moral obligation. Now, again, so my major kind of base argument for entire team's case is kind of how freedom of choice and certain universal moral rights are often more important than certain outcomes that opposition might come up and say are for the greater good, right? So they might come up and say that freedom of choice is not as important as something like if something's better for the society. But what consequentialism essentially leads to is that in many cases it abuses certain basic moral rights that individuals cannot be denied to, right? Those are universally accepted rights, right? So all in all, in conclusion, although consequentialism does have a good intent of they mask it off with a good intent for the greater good, in all sense we argue that consequentialism does not it violates basic rights for the greater good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I forgot to ask, has everyone consented to come? The debate's being recorded. Is everyone consented?
Yeah, I already asked them. Is there on time?
Sorry, 3, 2, 1. In this world of varied shades of gray and blurry lines, who states whether an action by itself is right or wrong? Good afternoon, honorable judges and my esteemed opponents. The motion we are here to debate today is that this House opposes consequentialism. Now, we, the opposition, strongly oppose this motion. Now, before we move forward, let me first display the case division. I, the first speaker, will be defining the motion and stating our team has a total of 3 arguments. I will be stating 1 argument. My second speaker will be providing statistics and stating 2 arguments while elaborating my points too. And my third speaker will be rebutting the arguments with reasoning and pure logic and understanding and defending our arguments. Now, let me first say what we say consequentialism is. Now, already in the time we know that consequentialism is the philosophy that the morality of an action is to be judged solely by their actions. Now, we strongly oppose the motion we are here to debate today because consequentialism takes into account the context surrounding the action too, rather than just strictly surrounding the arbitrary cases. So we take into account the entire situation based other than just the action that's happening. Now, let me start with my arguments. Now, morality. Morality is a very, it's based on perspective. Some people might think it's wrong, some people might think it's right. There are different views on how morality can be displayed. Now, who decides whether this is right or wrong? That's when we look at the consequences more than we look at the action. Now,
How does the speaker justify what morality being wrong?
we're not saying that morality is always wrong. We're saying that it has different perspectives. So some people might think, okay, let's say in a country there's some war happening. Now, the country where the war is happening, that people might think, oh, this morality is wrong or something. But the person who is taking the war, they might justify themselves. So a morality has two different sides, and the opposition says that we should take into account both the sides, and that's where the context of the situation matters more, rather than the action. Now, intention. Intention, it is important to look into intention because it takes into account everything, especially the context. Now, if a child states something because something happened and they didn't know whether it was right or wrong, then you can't just, the proposition is basically saying that we have to arrest them because they stole. Now, the child doesn't know whether it's right or wrong, right? They don't know what the moral values. They are being taught. Now, the proposition basically saying that we should arrest them because they stole. That is the action here, and the action is all that matters. The intention does not matter, the consequence does not matter. The action is what matters. That's basically what the proposition is trying to say. And we know that it's wrong because the child does not know whether it's right or wrong. They are being taught with the consequences. Now, we want to draw your attention to the argument we've just presented today. We use the assertion, reasoning, and evidence framework, and the impact it makes is that consequentialism, when we take into account this term, then we can find out what's actually happening. We take into account the entire situation and not just the action, because the action does not display everything that's happening. That's where intention also matters. Let me just summarize my case. The argument that I've presented today is about intention. We know that we're going to win this debate and take this debate home. The opposition have a clear upper hand in this debate. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that fine speech. Inviting second proposition to conclude the debate. Straight here.
One second.
I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. In this world of complexity, we find ourselves in daily situation. But what matters is, according to this consequentialism, what matters is the outcome, not the process. We don't even consider the moral values if they're upheld. We're exchanging morality for just the outcome. This I'm proud to propose. Now, 3 major things in my speech. Firstly, some refutations, then my arguments, then comparatives, right? Now, firstly, the opposition comes up here and says who decide. They start properly and frame their debate as who decides action is right or wrong, never really providing a proper clarity as to. They never really answer this who the person is or who the actor is, right, in this debate. Then they take into account the entire scenario, which is not possible in most cases as per consequentialism, because in most scenarios, including the example of trolley theory, you're supposed to do the action immediately, right? So you can't really say, oh, we guarantee we'll take the entire situation into consideration, yeah? That's like a totally fake promise addressing that philosophy. Thirdly, they even mention morality has different perspectives. Morality can even be wrong. On their side of the example of war, right? It's morally wrong. All of us know it's morally wrong to conduct wars because the victims of wars include numerous innocent citizens, right? So a country, even if they try to justify, yeah, we're right in conducting war, we're right in carrying out a war to just meet our needs, that's still morally wrong. Even though they're the ones in power, that's why they're carrying out. You can't say morality is wrong. Morality is not killing a person. It can never be wrong on any side. And even in the situation, the example or the situation they gave of a child committing a crime and being or not being arrested, they consider going through this scenario or these steps, right? There they consider morality. But in consequentialism, mere focus is given to morality, right? They only care about what the end result is. So that example is very biased for them to use as a support for their side, right? Now, firstly, my first argument, unnecessary demanding and risk-based calculation, right? Now, this philosophy of consequentialism puts everyone in the situation and they're forced to carry out a decision, right? So there's an unnecessary pressure on you to decide right and wrong. You may not be the best judge, but still, by the philosophy, you must consider the best consequence, even though you don't have sufficient resources or sufficient time to analyze the situation fully, right? So it brings up, like, firstly, you may not be the best judge, and even if you're the best judge, what's the chance that you address all the different phases of the situation, right? And even if, let's say you address all the situations, so what? What's the guarantee that the situations you got to see was actually correct? There's lots of room for mistakes to enter. There's a high chance that the information you saw or the faces you took into account could be wrong, could be fake. So just using the current situation for making the decision itself is wrong. So you can't take in consequentialism. Rather, as mentioned by my first speaker, if you take the morally correct step, which in this case would again be to let the child go, because this is the first time he's committing a crime. This is a moral decision primarily. It's not focusing on the consequence, and even if it's focusing, it's a biased example, right? So this proves consequentialism to be inefficient for crucial situation, right? Because justice is not ensured all the time, and it's you don't have freedom of choice because you have a natural pressure to make a decision immediately. So secondly, consequentialism is unfair, especially in a world of leaders, right? Because they are more concerned of doing their duty, not if they're doing it correctly or not. For example, if a leader comes up to make a decision, he sees there's a group of majority, there's a group of minority, boom, no further consideration. They see, okay, majority is benefited in this way, let's go ahead, because we have to focus on the outcome immediately, right? Consequentialism will stop them from thinking further, from thinking of a better situation where majority accounts for a yet bigger population, right? Not just by just a majority, but a bigger majority. The next step, the guarantee of them going to the next step is not certain, right? So the likeliness of wrong decisions or inefficient decisions happening is more just because of the existence of consequence, because we focus only on the consequences, not the steps we're doing. So even if, let's say, you in the example of trolley theory, even if you come up to the solution that, okay, I'll change the track of the train so that it only takes one life, not all five, right? So, but in the end, you'll have this, your guilt will be hitting you that you were responsible for the death of one person. But in our scenario, we would propose you to just walk away because you're not responsible for starting the train, right? You're not responsible for the persons being tied in the on the railway tracks. But you just came up to be an observer, to be one of the, you just ended up there in the wrong time. So it's better for you to walk away because that way you're not responsible for killing anyone. In that way, you can't be held accountable for anyone's death. Even if you try to decide based on these scenarios, okay, maybe that's some huge political figure, these are just mere citizens. So maybe I should switch the railway track to the mere citizens, right? Because the leader has much more responsibilities. How are you so sure no one, maybe the family that those 5 people sustain, maybe from that family yet a more powerful leader comes out, right? So considering the consequences, the situation itself will be inefficient just by going through consequentialism. So let's look at the comparators. On our side, stakeholders are on their side, stakeholders are considered to be the best judges. They just think you can analyze the situation as it is present and decide what to do correct is what you can do immediately. But on our side, we propose to go by your moral views, right? Because that's the best thing you can do. You don't know what's going to happen in the future. You're not even sure if you understood the situation completely. So this way, your morality outweighs the consequences. Thus, I rest my case.
You might second opposition is the opposition case. Here, here.
Good morning, everyone. I am the second speaker for the opposition side, and I will be defining and presenting my case. So, let us begin with my arguments. As we all know, actions by themselves have no defined morality. This is very important to this debate. We can take a few examples to compare. So in the case of, let's say, killing is bad. We know this statement in most moral debates this matter will come up. Killing is bad. However, we find that this is situation specific. It depends on the context. For example, in matters of self-defense, in matters of war, we find that people are rewarded for, or we find that killing is not considered bad in these contexts. I want to state this as I'm building up to my argument. Thus, my point here is that consequences give a standard to measure the morality of the action by. If we simply take the action in a vacuum, we cannot understand the context surrounding it and we cannot properly decide whether something is good or bad. Consequences give us that something to choose by. Even in the examples given by the proposition of state terrorism or of people dying, the actions there, the morality is not defined by what is stated as good or bad. It is based off the consequences of those actions. It is based off of what happens. Just because someone says that this is for the greater good, doesn't mean it is for the greater good. If the what I'm stating here is that the consequence is what we use to measure this subjective matter. Moreover, I would like to state that the general, even as per the example given by my first speaker, I would like to support her argument, the matter of intention, because if, say, we'll take the learning example part. So here, the context of the situation has been taken into account based on the consequence. This is why consequentialism presents a better overall view and allows us to take a more educated decision on the morality of an action. I will be leaving most of the refutations up to my third speaker, and we believe that this is a strong argument. This truly shows us all sides rather than giving us just a narrow view, a narrow, unrealistic, specific view. And that is why we will be taking home this debate. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that fine speech. And my third proposition to finish the proposition of this debate. Here's here.
Excuse me, how long did I speak for?
He spoke for
2 minutes 40 seconds.
Oh, your 15 seconds are up. You should go up there.
I'll be stopping this. 3, 2, 1. Panel, today we stand in a world where morality is weighed against its sole outcome. And in cases, the outcome is exchanged for basic ethics. 3 things I'll be doing in my speech today. Clashes by weighing it against 3 different metrics, that is magnitude, vulnerability, and time frame, and by layering it with different layers of analysis, direct rebuttals, and summarizing the case of my side. So the first proposition speaker stated about moral correction, correction. We are the ones to decide what is morally correct. We can't decide what is correct. We can't decide we are the best judges. So, which is why I stand with my second speaker that we should not we should not be obligated to decide what's the best outcome. And the proposition speaker kept on stating they kept on stating about takes into account the context. But this context, as stated by my second speaker, that we can't be the ones to decide. We can't be the best judges of what's the best outcome in this case, because we do not, at many in realistic situations, in practicality, we do not have enough context. We do not have enough context of a situation, And the best example is a trolley problem, as stated by both of my speakers, where we do not have the time or the resources to see which context is the best. And moving on to Wayne, about in their world, in their world, even if the outcome is good, but there is a possibility of the ethics being selfish. And why will it be selfish? Because there's going to be less accountability. For example, as stated by my first speaker about politicians, where the politician is just going to be comparing between majority and minority, and they're just going to be thinking of taking majority into consideration, and this violates the rights of minorities and promotes majoritarianism. And whereas in our case, even we're not supposed to take any right over here. We're not supposed to take any right over here. And as stated by my second speaker, the entire scenario to be taken into consideration is not possible, and it's also unnecessarily demanding. And addressing all the phases of a context is not possible, as stated by my second speaker. And the second speaker of opposition, the second speaker also mentioned about killing, like why someone shouldn't be killed or in a war. But in their context, this is completely wrong, because in the context they stated, they're not killing someone. They completely changed the context of the situation, where instead stopping a threat over here. And they also stated about allowing to take educated decision, but we can't decide what is really an educated decision, because again, as stated multiple times, that we cannot take educated decision as we do not have a context related to it. So which is why, even if you didn't buy anything in my speech, I'll be providing in 30 seconds why we win. In their best case scenario, there might be a good outcome. But even in their best case scenario, when there's a good outcome, there can be less accountability, there can be violation of minority rights, and there can also be selfish intention. Whereas in our worst case scenario, where we are respecting the rights of minorities, and we're also respecting all the people all the stakeholders in this situation, which is why I urge the panel to vote for the proposition. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you so much for that fine speech. In my opposition, clear to finish the constructive part, Mr. Baker, here.
May I start?
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, respected judges and my fellow debatees. I am the third speaker from team opposition, and I will be refuting and rebutting all arguments and points stated by team proposition. So let us start off with speaker number one. Speaker number one had mentioned how people will start losing emotional connection to the problem. You stated that people will start losing emotional connection. But isn't that when people deep dive into the morality of the situation? Isn't that when people actually look at the consequences of the action? Isn't that when they start losing emotional connection? That point stands with us. The next point stated by speaker number one is the denial of rights when it comes to consequentialism. How is it that how is it related to denial of rights? We are judging the morality of an action. We are judging the morality of a situation. You have not clarified how it is a denial of rights. You have just stated that it is a denial of rights. You have not provided any proper clarification. The next point stated by speaker number one, they had mentioned a trolley example. The trolley example, it clearly depends on the person who is facing the situation. We do have enough time for understanding the context of the situation, understanding the morality of the situation. But again, I would like to highlight, it depends on the person who is facing the situation. What solution are they going to take? Now I would like to move on to speaker number two. Speaker number two had mentioned the unnecessary pressure to decide what is wrong or what is right. Unnecessary pressure deciding what is wrong or what is right. No, we are checking the morality. The morality of the situation. It allows us to take a more educated decision. It allows us to think through the problem. It gives us time to see, okay, what is wrong, what is right. If we take a rash decision, who knows, it will affect the problem. It will definitely affect the problem if we take rash and fast decisions. I would like to highlight that speaker number one and speaker number number 2 had kept on revolving around the trolley example and around the same arguments, thus they've been unable to provide proper concrete arguments. Moving on to speaker number 3. Speaker number 3 had mentioned how we aren't the ones deciding which situation is morally correct or morally wrong. Aren't we the ones facing the situation? Aren't we the ones in the position to see which one is right and which one is wrong? How can you say that we aren't the ones? Then who else is doing? Then who else is checking whether the situation is morally correct or morally wrong? Moving on. Rejected. Moving on. Proposition speaker number 3 had also stated how we do not have enough context for the trolley problem. We, again, I would like to highlight, we are checking the morality of the situation. It is totally dependent on the person who's facing the situation. Moving on, speaker 3 had also mentioned that consequentialism is not possible, but you have also not clarified why it is not possible. You are lacking in your arguments. You have not provided clear-cut arguments on why it is not possible. So panel, you have seen how team proposition have not been able to provide rejected. You have also seen how proposition have not been able to provide concrete, clear-cut arguments which I have not been able to refute. I have refuted all the arguments and points stated by team proposition. And this is why I think team opposition, we are far, far ahead of team proposition, and this is why I think we have the upper hand in winning this debate. Thank you.
Now, since the opposition had this debate, inviting opposition to 5.
Good morning, everyone. I am the second speaker of the opposition side here back for the reply speech. I will be going over the main topics of this debate, presenting our views, comparing both sides, and stating why we, the opposition, have won this debate. So, to begin, the views presented by the proposition side were a lot more narrow. To take an example, we have how the debate, one of the main flashpoints ended up being the trolley example. So, here, even as per the example stated by the proposition, the decision is taken on the basis of consequence. This was refuted by my third speaker. They are choosing which side to take depending on the consequence of the action. So their example is in our favor. Moreover, I will be elaborating a few of the, I will be summarizing a few of the arguments presented by our side. That being intention. The intention of the matter is taken into account with the philosophy of consequentialism, defining actions and morality. Again, with consequentialism, we actually have some kind of standard to go off of, rather than it just being a purely subjective and purely opinion-based decision. With consequentialism, you actually have something concrete, some kind of fact that can assist you in making your decision. As such, we have presented our arguments with more clarity, we have presented our views properly, and this is why we believe that the opposition side will take home this debate. Thank you.
Now to finish this debate, finish this round, finish the quarterfinals in this room, inviting opposition to 5.
I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. Considering consequences to be the most important factor would be like justifying cheating in an exam just for the sake of getting full all the time, right? Now, two major things in my speech. Firstly, I'll provide the clashes. Secondly, I'll provide a comparative about how the debate has been so far on side top and off, right? Now, firstly, the first major concern group are obviously the stakeholders. Now, as mentioned before, opposition considers stakeholders all to be the same, to be the best judge. They have the so-called freedom of choice, even though consequentialism requires them to make a decision if they like it or not. Secondly, let's look at the principle aspect, right? Our principle is clear. We respect the right to privacy, we respect the right to choice, we allow morals to come forward every time you're in any situation, right? But on side opposition, they assure you fake principle of morality being, multi-phase. So morality can vary, it can depend on your perspective. They don't have a fixed definition of morality. Even in the example of killing a person is fine when it's self-defense. Well, that you can't refer to that as killing. It will firstly be considered self-defense, then it will be considered like killing, because you, in an attempt to self-defend yourself, you didn't kill for self-defense, right? Now let's see the practicality. We understand everyone's ability, and in that way, we've come to oppose consequentialism, because it's not always practical to consider all the phases, and even if you consider there might be some inefficiency while considering, right? So in that way, we've said consequentialism won't be fit for making decisions, but they've continuously stuck to consequentialism without providing basic supporting points, right? Like 1 or 2 points came up, but they were quite unclear. They only relied on refuting why we don't want to support, and they wanted to use those claims as why they want to support. They never really showed us a comparison of how their side is actually favoring more, and it's actually justifying more crucial points in this debate, right? So again, in the trolley theory, they misinterpreted the person to have a choice, ignoring the fact that they're bound to make decisions. Then they even mentioned that they will check morality as they will make the decisions. That's clearly what we propose, yet they thought of bringing that up even as side opposition. They appear to be ahead to move on continuously without proposing real solutions, just floating refutations by saying, okay, their analysis wasn't complete, so you can't consider this point. They didn't provide proper examples, so you can't consider this. So they don't have any proper clarity as to how they will proceed. They're solely relying on refuting our points, even though they must come up with a proper solution in this case to justify, to clearly show how consequentialism is important, and it's like the best solution we have as of now, right? Whereas in proposition, we oppose consequentialism with good reasons. We oppose it because you have an unnecessary obligation to make certain decisions, right? You're in an unnecessarily demanding situation, even though you don't have the complete ability to make proper calculation. We've also taken examples where these have come up to be inefficient. We've also mentioned about how when there's crucial leaders, consequentialism will force them not to think, it won't force them to think forward, right? The moment they come up with a solution, they just move on with it. Consequentialism would be the reason they stop from thinking about better solutions, right? So we've also mentioned about how consequentialism is in fact wrong because of the different abilities people have, and depending on the different scenarios, you can't normalize this philosophy of consequentialism for everything. Thus, I rest my case, requesting the jury to let the motion stand.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that fine speech. That concludes the debate. Shake hands, cross doors. Yeah, and we do them. Stand up. We will have a